Okay, next question is, when should nullable types be used in C#?
Well, first, let's talk about what a null is. Let's start off there. So a null, very much like the never-ending story, is the concept of nothing. And that does throw off a lot of the junior programmers because they like to think of null as empty or zero.
Yes. In European or football or soccer, when somebody is 0 to 0, they say nil to nil, but that is not our null. It's not
Right.
Zero. Zero is not null.
0 is 0, null is nothing.
Yes.
0 would be something, null is still nothing.
Right.
So it's this concept of not being any value. And it's often the initial value for most of our types, because we usually deal with reference types a lot. So strings, classes, anything that we have to new up generally, without giving them a value, they are null.
Yeah.
The exception to that is value types.
Okay.
So value types, which we've talked before, structs, ints, decimals, your real core root level value types, they all have an initial default value.
Yeah.
And not hard to guess, it's almost always 0. So in the case
It would
of
be weird if it wasn't.
in the case of ints, it's in some languages it's not.
Well, I mean, if this int is 75 or 73.
You would think that, but if you go back to C, it's not.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
crazy. But
So I've run this. So our reference type is null. So it is not blank. It's nothing.
yes, we could set it to an empty string, but that would be setting it to something. Right now it is nothing.
Yeah. Now it is something.
Right.
And then obviously D is
D is 0,
as well.
int is 0, floats would be 0.
Right.
So when we talk about nullable types, let's just remember that all of our reference types are inherently nullable. That int I cannot set it equal to null. I mean, I can, it'll not compile, but it'll put an error underneath it. Let's go ahead and do that just for,
Yep.
So I'm going to get an error that's going to say, I'm sure it's going to be something insulting, cannot convert null to int because it is not a non-nullable value type. Yeah. So we had a video somewhere. I don't think it was in our interview. We had a video where we talked about all the magical things you can do in C# with the question mark.
Oh yeah, no, that was a different one. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you put a question mark behind any data type, including value types, it tells the compiler explicitly that this can be null. So even though it's an int, with a question mark behind it, it can be set equal to null.
Yep.
Now, the problem is, and I think the root of the question that was asked was, when do we make something nullable when it isn't always nullable by default?
Right.
And for a lot of times, it doesn't make sense to make a nullable int because it's just adding extra complication where it isn't needed.
Right.
But a lot of times, we do need an int to be null because it truly doesn't have a value. The first place we come across this is anytime we're working with data from a database, because often it's coming from a table that is of type integer, but it is nullable in the database.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need to represent that in our code, or often we need to represent that in our code. We can't just say it's 0 and move on.
Right.
So a nullable int is really important there. But a lot of times in our code, we want to know that a value isn't set.
I mean, sometimes you want, so if I have age, right, and I'm talking to somebody, I want age to be null because I don't know their age yet.
Right.
If we put 0, then it's an absolute value and they're a baby. But we don't know what they are yet, and we don't want to presume. So at that point, we want a nullable until they tell us they're a baby, and then we put 0.
Yeah, you could write some logic to say null means I don't know.
Right.
And maybe the program knows, it's a null. I need to ask prompt the user to ask them for their age,
Right.
or something like that. It can also just mean that it's not set.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a property or a configuration, and we want to show that it hasn't been set to a value.
Exactly.
We can make it nullable.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it unnecessarily, though.
Right.
So if there's no reason to make it nullable, it overly complicates our code, because then it could be a null comes down and we have
Right.
to check for it. Because obviously you can't do anything with nulls. You can't add a null or subtract a null, or
Yeah, so there's certain things that'll break. So you do have to do a lot of checking to make sure it's not null, because, yeah, it could mess a bunch of stuff up when using it in a nullable state.
Right.
Yeah. So, real quick, when somebody asks this interviewer asking, what do you think the one-line sentence what are the buzzwords what do you think they're looking for?
I would say we make a value type nullable when null is a valid state for the data.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for watching that video from F12 Programming. Please remember to like and subscribe. That does so much for us in the ratings. You have no idea. Also, don't forget to comment below. I hope you enjoyed, and good luck coding.